AITA for asking my best friend to choose between me and her boyfriend? Okay, so this is a bit of a long story, but I need advice and maybe some perspective on whether or not I'm being in a asterisk hole in this situation. I, 27F, have been friends with Laura, 26F, since we were kids. We've been through a lot together, and she's genuinely one of the most important people in my life. We live in the same city and usually hang out at least once or twice a week. We talk on the phone almost every day, and I would say our friendship is pretty solid. For context, Laura started dating Ethan, 30M, about a year ago. I met him a few times, and at first, I thought he seemed like a decent guy. He's charming and friendly, but I've never quite gotten the vibe that he was really right for her. I think that happens sometimes with friends, where you can just feel like someone isn't a good match for them, even if they're not necessarily a bad person. At first, things were normal, but over the last few months, I've started to notice some red flags. For one, he's constantly making digs at Laura, mostly about her career and how she spent her money. She works in a field where she's very passionate, but it doesn't pay well. He's always commenting on how she should get a real job and how she wastes money on things that make her happy. Laura is the type of person who's very independent and doesn't let things like that bother her too much, but it's been clearly wearing on her. She used to be very upbeat about her future plans, but lately, she's been more withdrawn and insecure about her choices, which isn't like her at all. The thing that really started bugging me was the way Ethan treats her when they're with other people. I've been at a couple of social gatherings where they've both been present, and Ethan will make passive-aggressive comments about Laura in front of other people. It's not like outright insulting her, but more like these little jabs that aren't funny and don't seem necessary. Once at a friend's barbecue, Laura was telling a story about a work project she was really proud of, and Ethan interrupted her to say, "Oh yeah, she did that project. Good for her, I guess. It's not like it's going to change the world, but it's cute that she thinks so." The whole group went silent, and Laura kind of awkwardly laughed it off, but you could see the discomfort on her face. There have been other moments like that, where Ethan's comments seem to undermine Laura, but she doesn't really stand up for herself. It's like she just shrugs it off, and it's been slowly eroding her self-confidence. I know how she used to be, and it really bothers me to see her like this. I tried talking to her about it a few months ago. I casually asked if she was happy in the relationship and if Ethan's behavior was bothering her. She said she was fine and that I was overreacting, that Ethan just had a weird sense of humor. I didn't push it because I know Laura is fiercely independent and hates when people try to fix her life without her asking. So, I kept my mouth shut for a while. But things continued to get worse, and I couldn't just ignore it anymore. About 2 weeks ago, we were hanging out at my place, having dinner, and catching up. We were talking about some future plans, and Laura mentioned how she wanted to go back to school to pursue a new career path she'd been interested in for a while. I could tell she was excited about it. But as soon as she said it, Ethan sent her a text. She opened it, and immediately, her whole face fell. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "It's just Ethan. He says I'm being irresponsible by spending money on tuition instead of saving for a house." I could see how hurt she was, and I just lost it. I asked her if this was the kind of person she wanted to be with long-term, someone who couldn't support her dreams and always made her feel small. Laura got defensive, which I expected, but I pushed a little harder, asking if she was truly happy in the relationship or if she was just sticking it out because she felt like she had to. I told her that I would never want her to feel like she couldn't be herself around her partner, and that if Ethan couldn't see her for who she was and what she wanted to do, maybe he wasn't the right person for her. Laura got really upset and told me that I was trying to tear them apart and that I didn't understand her relationship. She said I was being dramatic and that I didn't know everything about their dynamic. I tried to explain that I wasn't trying to break them up, but that I was just worried about her and didn't like how Ethan treated her. But she accused me of overstepping and said I had no right to tell her what to do. Now here's where things get tricky. After our conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was right. I knew Laura deserved better than someone who constantly put her down. So, I told her that if she was going to continue to be with someone who made her feel bad about herself, I couldn't keep being friends with her. I told her I couldn't be around someone who didn't value themselves enough to stand up for themselves, and I couldn't watch her waste more time with someone who didn't treat her well. I told her she needed to choose between me and Ethan because I couldn't keep watching her lose herself for the sake of a relationship that clearly wasn't healthy. Laura was devastated. She said I was being unreasonable and that I shouldn't try to make her choose between me and her boyfriend. She also said that I was trying to control her life and that I should be supporting her decisions, even if I didn't agree with them. We haven't spoken much since then, and I feel like I've really screwed things up. I never wanted to lose her as a friend, but I also can't stand by and watch her get dragged down by someone who doesn't respect her. I've been wondering if I overstepped. Maybe I should have just let her figure things out for herself, or maybe I should have tried to approach the situation differently. I know it's her life, but I really feel like she's making a mistake, and I don't want to just watch it happen. So, AITA for asking her to choose between me and her boyfriend. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot and motivates me to create even more amazing content just for you. Make sure to turn on notifications so you'll never miss out on a new video. I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your support. It truly helps the channel grow. AITA for refusing to let my brother-in-law stay at my house after he trashed my place. I, 28M, am married to my wife, Emma, 30F, for almost 4 years now. We live in a modest 3-bedroom home, which we've worked hard to get, and it's been a place that we've always made sure is clean, cozy, and welcoming for the both of us. Emma's family lives about an hour away, and while I get along with most of them, there's one person I can't stand, her brother, Dan, 26M. He's been a constant source of tension in our marriage, but I'll get to that. Dan is, well, a mess. Not just the kind of messy that you can tidy up every now and then, but the kind of messy that you can't ignore. He's always late, forgets important things, and is generally disorganized in a way that affects everyone around him. He's also got this sense of entitlement that's hard to overlook. It's like he thinks the world revolves around him, and it's put a strain on his relationship with Emma and their parents. Dan has a history of making bad decisions, and his lifestyle reflects that. He doesn't have a stable job, always jumps from one thing to the next without any real commitment, and has been through several failed relationships. Emma and I have had to bail him out financially a few times when he's found himself in a bind, and while we've helped him out of the kindness of our hearts, it's starting to feel like it's becoming a pattern. He's never asked for help up front, but when he needs it, he doesn't hesitate to ask. And when he gets the help, he doesn't show much gratitude. It's frustrating. A few weeks ago, Dan called Emma, asking if he could stay at our house for a few days. He said he was between places, his current living arrangement fell through again, and that he needed a place to stay while he figured things out. Emma, being the kind-hearted person she is, immediately said yes without consulting me. I'm all for helping family, but I had a bad feeling about it, especially considering his track record. I wasn't happy about it, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I told Emma that I wasn't exactly thrilled about Dan staying with us, but if it was only for a few days, it wouldn't be a huge deal. Big mistake. Dan showed up with only a suitcase, no real plans, and an aura of someone who was not going to leave anytime soon. Emma had told me he'd only be staying for a few days, but as the days passed, Dan didn't seem in any rush to find a new place. He'd lounge around the house all day, leave dirty dishes everywhere, and make a mess in the bathroom. He didn't clean up after himself, and when I confronted him about it, he gave me some weak excuse about being in transition and not used to staying in other people's homes. The thing that really pushed me over the edge was when I caught him snooping around our personal things. I have a drawer where I keep important documents and some personal items, and one day I found that it had been opened and things were out of place. I confronted him about it, and he laughed it off, saying he was just looking for a pen. But I knew that wasn't true. It felt like a violation of my privacy, and I didn't let it slide. I talked to Emma about it that night, and she brushed it off, telling me I was overreacting. She said Dan didn't mean any harm and that he was just going through a rough time. But I felt uncomfortable in my own home, and after everything he had already done, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep letting him stay there. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of Dan overstaying his welcome, I had enough. He wasn't looking for a new place, wasn't contributing to the household in any way, and was creating a tense atmosphere in our home. So, I told Emma that I wanted him to leave. I wasn't asking her to pick between me and her brother, but I felt like my needs as her husband were being ignored in favor of his. Emma didn't take it well. She got upset, telling me I was being too hard on him and that he didn't have anywhere else to go. I told her that he was a grown man and needed to start taking responsibility for his own life instead of relying on others. I also told her that if he wasn't going to help around the house or respect my space, then he needed to leave. Emma tried to argue with me, but I stood firm. She said I was being harsh and that I didn't understand how difficult things were for Dan right now. She even suggested that I was being too controlling about the situation, and it didn't help that Dan overheard part of the conversation. Dan got involved and started telling me that I was being selfish for not letting him stay longer and that I didn't understand his situation. He accused me of trying to kick him out when he had nowhere else to go. He played the victim, and it worked. Emma, of course, sided with him, and it became a huge argument. After that, I gave them both an ultimatum. Either Dan leaves or I do. I told Emma that I couldn't keep living in a situation where I felt disrespected in my own home. She asked me if I was really going to make her choose between her brother and me, and I told her I didn't want to be put in that position, but I couldn't continue to allow Dan to invade our home and disrupt our life like this. In the end, Emma told Dan he had to leave, but it wasn't without a huge fallout. She was angry at me for not being more patient, and she said I should have tried harder to help him through his issues instead of pushing him away. It's been a week now, and the tension between Emma and me is still there. She says I was too harsh, and I feel like she's been distant ever since. I don't want to argue with her, but I also feel like my boundaries should have been respected. I know that family is important, and I'm not trying to paint Dan as a villain. But at what point does helping someone turn into enabling bad behavior? I feel like I did the right thing by standing up for myself and setting a boundary, but now I'm questioning if I overreacted. So, AITA for kicking my brother-in-law out of our home after he overstayed his welcome and disrespected my space. AITA for telling my friend she's not welcome to stay at my house anymore after the way she treated my partner. I've been friends with Emily for almost 10 years. We met in college, and it's always been a solid friendship. She's the type of person who's fun to hang out with, and we've been through a lot together over the years. She's got a strong personality, and she doesn't hold back when it comes to speaking her mind, but for the most part, I've always been able to brush it off because she's my friend, and I know she means well. Recently, things got a little messy, and now I'm starting to wonder if I made the wrong decision. I live with my partner, Ben. We've been together for about 2 years now. Ben and I are pretty different people, and at first, Emily and Ben didn't exactly hit it off, but it wasn't anything too major. I thought they would eventually warm up to each other. In fact, Ben and I had already talked about how to navigate having Emily stay with us for short periods of time, because she'd been having some personal issues. She was going through a rough breakup, and her living situation was unstable for a while, so I offered to let her stay with us until she figured things out. I thought it was the right thing to do since she's one of my best friends. At first, it was fine. Emily was staying with us for a week or so, and it was going smoothly. However, after the first few days, things started to take a weird turn. Emily began making passive-aggressive comments about Ben's habits. Things that were really small, like the way he left his shoes by the door or the fact that he liked to leave the TV on even when he wasn't watching it. I didn't think much of it at first, because I thought she was just venting or going through a rough patch emotionally. But then the comments started coming more frequently and were directed more at Ben, and I could see he was getting frustrated. One evening, we were all sitting in the living room watching a movie. Ben was just being himself, as usual, chilling on the couch, scrolling through his phone while we were watching the movie. Emily, who was sitting across the room, just suddenly blurted out, "You know, you're really rude when you do that. You could at least pretend you're actually watching the movie." Ben was taken aback and just looked at her like she'd lost her mind. He said, "I'm just trying to relax, Emily. It's not a big deal." But she kept going. "Well, it's annoying. I mean, you do it all the time, and it's like you don't care about anyone else in the room." I felt uncomfortable, but I tried to stay neutral because I didn't want to escalate things. I told Emily, maybe we should all just try to enjoy the movie. Ben's just chilling out. She shot me a look like I was betraying her or something. I tried to defuse the tension, but Emily didn't let it go. Over the next few days, she made more snide remarks about Ben. At first, I thought it was just her being stressed out and not knowing how to handle the breakup, but then it started becoming more of a pattern. It felt like she was intentionally trying to cause problems between us. One evening, after a particularly annoying comment about Ben's lack of ambition, which I felt was completely unfair and untrue, I had enough. I pulled Emily aside and told her that I didn't appreciate the way she was treating Ben. I told her she could vent to me all she wanted, but if she couldn't be respectful toward my partner, I wouldn't be able to have her stay in my place anymore. I explained that I didn't expect them to be best friends, but mutual respect was non-negotiable. Emily's reaction caught me off guard. She immediately went on the defensive, claiming that I was taking Ben's side and that I was blindly protecting him. She said that I had no idea how much she'd been putting up with and how much of a self-centered prick Ben was. She also said that she didn't want to stay at a place where she felt unwelcome. That really hurt because I never intended for her to feel that way. The next morning, Emily packed up her things and left without saying much. We didn't talk for a couple of days. Eventually, she texted me saying that she didn't want to fight and that she was going to stay with a friend of hers instead. I replied, letting her know that I understood, but I also made it clear that if she wanted to come back, the way she treated Ben had to change. I didn't want to keep a toxic dynamic in my life, especially in my home. It's been a few weeks, and the whole situation still feels unresolved. Emily hasn't reached out since, and I've been going back and forth in my head, wondering if I made the right call. I feel guilty, but at the same time, I don't think I did anything wrong. My partner is important to me, and I don't think I should have to choose between him and my best friend, especially when I've done so much for her. I've talked to Ben about a lot, and he's been supportive, but I can tell he feels uncomfortable with the tension between me and Emily. He's a good guy, and I feel bad that this is causing stress for him. Emily hasn't really made any effort to reconcile, and I'm starting to think she might be holding on as some kind of grudge. Part of me wonders if I should just give it time, but another part of me is wondering if I've completely ruined a long friendship over something that maybe didn't need to be such a big deal. So, AITA for telling my friend she's not welcome to stay at my house anymore after the way she treated my partner. AITA for refusing to help my sister after she accused me of ruining her life. I, 28M, have a sister, Kate, 26F, who I've always been close with. We were raised in a fairly strict household, but we always had each other's backs. Over the years, however, things have started to shift in our relationship. I'll try to explain everything as clearly as possible. To start, Kate and I have always been different in terms of career paths. I graduated college with a degree in engineering and landed a good job shortly after. Kate, on the other hand, decided to pursue a career in music. She's incredibly talented, but it's been a tough road for her, financially and emotionally. Her music is more niche, and she's struggled to find success. Despite this, she's passionate about it, and I've always supported her dreams. However, over the past few years, I've started to notice a shift in Kate's attitude. She's always been independent, but lately, she seems to be leaning on me for everything. I don't mind helping her when it's necessary, but it's been escalating to the point where it feels more like she's depending on me to take care of her life instead of trying to make it on her own. I've tried to talk to her about this, but every time I bring it up, she accuses me of not being supportive enough or not caring about her. A few months ago, Kate came to me with a huge problem. She had been living in a shared apartment with another musician, but they had a falling out, and Kate was forced to move out. She didn't have a place to go, and she was crying on my doorstep asking if she could stay with me temporarily until she figured things out. I told her that I didn't have the space, as I'm living in a small apartment with my girlfriend, Sarah, 27F, who's been living with me for almost 2 years now. I also reminded Kate that I've always been there for her, but I couldn't just drop everything to take care of her, especially when she hadn't made any real progress toward getting herself on stable footing. Kate got upset, but I thought the situation would blow over. Unfortunately, it didn't. She started sending me texts and calling me, asking for money to pay for a place to stay or help with her music career. I made it clear that I couldn't afford to support her in that way, as Sarah and I have our own financial goals, and I don't feel like I should be responsible for her well-being when she's in her mid-20s and should be learning to stand on her own. Things started escalating when Kate began posting on social media about me. She made it seem like I was a horrible brother who didn't care about her, posting passive-aggressive comments like, "Some people just don't understand what it's like to struggle, and some brothers only care about their own lives." It hurt, especially because I had always been supportive of her, but I didn't want to let it affect me. I tried to call her and explain why I couldn't offer more help, but she just yelled at me and said I was abandoning her when she needed me the most. The last straw came a few weeks ago when Kate came to me again, saying she had been kicked out of another apartment, this time because of an argument with her landlord. She was blaming everything on me, claiming I ruined her life by not supporting her enough. I'm not sure where this was coming from, but I honestly couldn't take it anymore. I told her that I wasn't going to continue enabling her behavior, and that if she wanted to make a career out of music, she needed to find her own way to support herself and not rely on me to bail her out. Kate exploded. She said I was selfish, that I had always been the golden child in the family, and that I only cared about my own success. She accused me of ruining her life by not giving her the support she needed to make it. To be clear, I've never seen myself as the golden child, but I can't deny that I have a stable job and a good relationship, while she struggled to get her footing. But I didn't think that meant I owed her my entire financial or emotional support. After that conversation, Kate stopped talking to me. I've heard from family members that she's telling everyone that I've completely abandoned her and that I don't care about her well-being. My parents are also upset with me, saying I should have been there for her more. They're siding with her, and I feel like I'm getting dragged through the mud for standing my ground. I've tried to explain my perspective, but they just don't seem to understand where I'm coming from. It's been hard for me, and I feel conflicted. I love my sister, and I've always wanted the best for her, but I don't think I can keep letting her manipulate me into solving her problems. I've been kind to her, but I've also been clear about my limits. I don't think I'm being unreasonable by not enabling her behavior and helping her with everything. But now, I'm starting to wonder if I'm being too harsh. So, AITA for refusing to help my sister and standing firm on my boundaries, even though it's caused a rift in our family. AITA for not letting my brother's girlfriend move in with me after he asked. Okay, so this might sound petty, but I honestly don't know if I'm being unreasonable here. I, 29F, have always been really close with my brother, Tom, 27M. We've lived together before in the past when we were both in college, and we have a great relationship. I don't mind helping him out whenever he needs it, but something happened recently that has made me second-guess things. So, a little background. Tom has been dating his girlfriend, Jess, 25F, for about 6 months. They've been really serious from the start. I've met her a few times, and she's nice enough, but I've noticed some things that are making me uncomfortable. For one, she tends to be a little entitled. She expects things to be done for her and has a habit of speaking to Tom as if she's the one in charge. Nothing extreme, but enough to make me feel weird around her. I don't know if it's just me, but there's a vibe I get from her that feels a little off, like she's very used to getting her way and doesn't take no for an answer. A few weeks ago, Tom called me to ask for a favor. He told me that Jess was going through some personal stuff. She had recently broken up with a roommate who had been one of her close friends, and apparently, the situation was pretty messy. Jess was struggling to find a new place to live because most of her friends were either living with partners or had moved away. Tom said that he didn't feel comfortable having her move in with him because their apartment was small and he was concerned about their relationship dynamics changing if they lived together too soon. He mentioned that she was really upset about it and that she was asking if I could let her stay with me temporarily until she found a new place. At first, I didn't think much of it. I have a 2-bedroom apartment in a nice area, and I have the space. I'm single, so I don't have to worry about a roommate disrupting my life. But then Tom added, it's only going to be for a month or so, and she really doesn't have anywhere else to go. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'll help her with anything she needs. I agreed to think about it, but I was already feeling uneasy. The more I thought about it, the less comfortable I became with the idea of Jess staying with me. The biggest issue for me was that I've been living alone for several years, and I really value my privacy and personal space. I don't mind guests now and then, but having someone move in, even temporarily, felt like a huge change. I've been used to having my own routine and not having to worry about someone else's habits or presence constantly. On top of that, I knew that Jess didn't have the best track record with boundaries. I'd heard stories from Tom about how she'd been a bit intrusive with his things, and I didn't want to end up in an awkward situation where she was taking over my space or making herself too comfortable. The other thing that really bothered me was that I didn't feel like Tom was being fully honest with me about Jess's behavior. He's a bit of a fixer and tends to shield people from confrontation, so he was downplaying some of her quirks. I could tell he was trying to convince me that it would be fine, but I didn't feel comfortable just brushing off my instincts. So, after giving it some thought, I decided to say no. I texted Tom and told him that while I understood Jess was in a tough spot, I wasn't comfortable with her moving in with me. I explained that I value my space, and I didn't feel like it was the right arrangement for me at this time. I also told him that I didn't think it was a good idea for me to be put in the position of being the temporary housing solution, and I felt like it would create unnecessary tension. I suggested that he could help her look for a place to stay, or maybe she could stay with one of her other friends temporarily until she found a more permanent option. Tom was really upset by my response. He said I was being selfish and that it wasn't like I had a full house, so it wouldn't be a huge inconvenience. He said I was acting like I was doing her a favor by letting her stay, and that it was just for a month. I felt guilty after reading his message, but I stood firm in my decision. I said that I was still uncomfortable with it and didn't want to make a commitment I wasn't sure about. The situation escalated when I saw Jess the next time. She was at Tom's place, and when I walked in, she immediately asked me why I said no to her moving in. She said she didn't understand why I couldn't just be a little more helpful, and that she didn't want to be in a position where she was bouncing from friend to friend. She acted like I was somehow being unreasonable by saying no. I told her it wasn't personal and that I just wasn't comfortable with it. But Jess kept pushing, making comments like, "I didn't know you were so selfish, and it's just for a short time. It's not like I'm asking you to let me stay forever." I tried to keep my cool, but it was hard not to feel frustrated. I felt like I was being guilt-tripped by both of them, and I was starting to wonder if I had made the right call. Tom and I have barely spoken since then. He's been distant and hasn't really checked in on me, which is unusual for us. Every time I see him, he gives me the silent treatment or is kind of cold. I know he's upset, but I don't think I did anything wrong. I don't feel comfortable having Jess move in with me, and I don't think I should have to justify that to anyone. Still, I feel guilty for causing tension between me and my brother, and I'm starting to second-guess whether I made the right decision. AITA for not letting my brother's girlfriend move in with me after he asked. AITA for refusing to let my sister borrow my car after she crashed it last year. I, 30M, have an older sister, Sarah, 34F, who is always in some kind of personal crisis. Our relationship has always been a little rocky because she tends to lean on me a lot for emotional and financial support. She's had a history of making questionable decisions, especially when it comes to money, relationships, and her career. But every time she messes up, she comes to me for help, and I've been there for her more times than I can count. Last year, Sarah asked me if she could borrow my car for a few days because hers had broken down and she couldn't afford to fix it at the time. At the time, I had just bought a new car, which I'd saved up for over the last few years. I was really proud of it, and it felt like a milestone for me. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of her driving my new car, but I agreed because she's my sister and I wanted to help her out. That was a huge mistake. 3 days later, I got a call from Sarah. She was in tears, telling me that she had crashed my car. Apparently, she was speeding and lost control of the vehicle while trying to avoid hitting another car. The damage wasn't just a small fender bender. My car was totaled. The worst part? She didn't have insurance at the time. She had let her insurance lapse months before, but she didn't tell me. She said she was planning to renew it soon, but we both knew that was a lie. The car was a complete loss, and it would cost a fortune to replace it or fix it. I was devastated. I loved that car, and it represented a lot of hard work and saving. But beyond the material loss, I was furious with Sarah. Not only had she ruined something I'd worked so hard for, but she had put herself and others at risk by driving uninsured and speeding. I tried to stay calm, but I couldn't help it. I snapped at her, telling her how irresponsible she was and how badly she had messed up. She apologized, but it didn't feel like enough. I told Sarah that I would need to file an insurance claim, and she promised to help pay for the damages. She agreed to take out a loan to cover the costs, but as the weeks went by, she never followed through. She kept promising, but the money never materialized. I ended up covering the cost out of my own pocket, which set me back financially. In the end, I was forced to buy a new car, and it was much cheaper than the one I had originally had. It was a big blow to my savings, and I had to delay some of my financial goals because of the debt I had taken on. But the worst part was the damage to my relationship with Sarah. She never really took full responsibility for what happened, and when I expressed how hurt I was, she would get defensive or just avoid the conversation altogether. Fast forward to this year, and Sarah reached out to me again, asking if she could borrow my car. This time, it was for a job interview. She had recently gotten a new job offer, but her old car was still broken down. She said she needed to drive to the interview, and since her new job was on the other side of town, she wouldn't be able to make it without a car. She apologized for the incident last year and promised that she'd take care of my car this time. To be honest, I was really torn. On one hand, I knew she was in a tough spot. On the other hand, I could still feel the sting of what happened last year. I didn't want to lend her my car, but I also didn't want to seem like the jerk who wouldn't help his sister out when she really needed it. After a lot of back and forth in my head, I finally told her no. I told her that I couldn't trust her with my car again after what happened last year, and I wasn't willing to risk it. Sarah didn't take it well. She got really upset and said I was being petty, holding a grudge, and that she had already apologized multiple times. She told me I was being unforgiving, and that if the roles were reversed, she would have lent me her car without hesitation. She accused me of treating her like she was a failure and said I was punishing her for something that happened a year ago. I tried to explain that it wasn't just about the car. It was about the fact that she had made promises and not followed through, and I felt like she didn't take responsibility for her actions. Things got really heated, and our conversation ended with her saying, "Fine, I'll just figure it out myself. I guess I don't matter enough for you to help me." That stung. I never want her to feel like I don't care about her, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that she had let me down in the past, and it felt like I was being taken for granted. After that, I felt conflicted. Part of me felt like I had done the right thing by standing my ground, but another part of me wondered if I was being too harsh. Sarah has always been the type to make mistakes and then ask for help when things go wrong. But this time, I didn't want to be the one she relied on for a quick fix. I felt like I had done enough for her in the past, and it was time for her to take responsibility for her actions without expecting me to bail her out every time. Our relationship has been a little strained ever since. We don't talk as much, and when we do, it's usually tense. My parents have also weighed in, saying that I should have helped her out since she was just trying to get her life together. They think I'm being too hard on her, but I don't feel like I should be constantly enabling her mistakes. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister borrow my car after she crashed it last year and hasn't fully made amends? AITA for telling my sister she can't use my car after she totaled hers and then getting into a huge fight over it? I, 29F, have always had a really close relationship with my younger sister, Kate, 26F. Growing up, we were more like best friends and siblings. We'd always have each other's backs, and I thought that would never change. But recently, our relationship has become strained over something I never expected: my car. A little background. I work a pretty stable job, and I saved up for years to buy my dream car, a 2018 Subaru Outback. I've always been careful with my money, and the car was a big investment for me. I know it's just a car, but it holds a lot of sentimental value to me. I take really good care of it, and I've had it for about 3 years now. I also rely on a lot for work, since I often travel for meetings. Kate, on the other hand, is a bit more reckless with money. She's had several cars over the years, but it seems like she never holds on to them for long. She's totaled 2 cars in the past 5 years, which, needless to say, has made me nervous every time she borrows someone's car. She doesn't have great luck with vehicles, and I've always been hesitant to let her drive mine, even though she's asked in the past. I've told her multiple times that I don't want her driving my car because of her history, but she always brushes it off and claims she's better now. A couple of weeks ago, Kate called me in the middle of the night, sounding frantic. She told me that she had just totaled her car and didn't know what to do. I was immediately upset, especially because it was the third car in less than 5 years. She told me she was fine, thankfully, but her car was wrecked beyond repair. I was angry, but I tried to stay calm because she was in a bit of a panic. The next day, she came over to my place to talk about the accident. She explained that she was driving a little too fast in an area she wasn't familiar with, lost control of the car, and ended up hitting a tree. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I was still frustrated. I told her I couldn't keep enabling her reckless behavior, especially with the history she had. I also reminded her that she had wrecked her previous car in almost the same manner, and it was getting to the point where I couldn't keep bailing her out. She then dropped a bombshell. She said she was planning on driving my car while her insurance settlement came through. My stomach dropped. I immediately told her no. I told her that I couldn't let her drive my car after everything that had happened. She was taken aback, insisting that it was the only way she could get around, and that she needed to borrow my car until she figured things out. She promised that she'd be careful and that nothing would happen, but I couldn't take that risk. I explained again that I wasn't comfortable with her borrowing my car, given her track record. I told her I could help her with other things, like helping her find a rental or helping her navigate getting another car, but that my car was off limits. She got upset, saying I was being unreasonable and unsupportive. She argued that I had the means to help her out, and that if I truly cared about her, I'd let her use my car until she got hers replaced. The situation escalated quickly. Kate was really angry, and the conversation turned into a full-blown fight. She accused me of being selfish, saying that I didn't care about her enough to make this small sacrifice. She called me a spoiled brat for even thinking that my car was more important than helping her. She said that I was being cold and unhelpful, and that I was only thinking about myself. To say I was hurt would be an understatement. She knows how much my car means to me, but her words felt like a slap in the face. I tried to stay calm, but at this point, I felt cornered. I told her that I wasn't going to sacrifice my peace of mind for her convenience. I pointed out that she had a history of bad driving decisions and that I wasn't comfortable letting her take my car, especially considering the fact that she had totaled her last car for the third time. I told her it wasn't about me being selfish. It was about me protecting what I worked hard for and being realistic about her ability to be responsible with it. Kate didn't take it well. She stormed out of my house, calling me all kinds of names and saying that I wasn't a good sister. That night, I didn't hear from her at all. The next few days were tense. She didn't reply to my calls or texts, and I started to feel guilty. I wanted to be there for her, but I also wanted to stand my ground. A few days later, I got a message from her on social media, where she apologized for some of the things she said, but she still felt hurt that I wouldn't help her by lending her my car. She told me that I was making her feel like she was a burden and that she just needed my support right now, not a lecture about her past mistakes. She asked if we could talk, but I wasn't sure what to say. I know she's going through a rough time, but I still feel like I did the right thing. Now, I'm left wondering if I should have been more understanding. I do care about Kate, and I don't want to see her struggling, but I also don't think I should have to compromise my boundaries just because she's my sister. I know she's made some poor choices in the past, but I also feel like I've already done enough to support her. I'm really torn between wanting to help her and protecting myself and my belongings. So, AITA for telling my sister she can't use my car after she totaled hers and then getting into a huge fight over it. AITA for refusing to let my parents live with me after they sold their house without asking me first. I, 30M, have a somewhat complicated relationship with my parents. I grew up in a small suburban town, and we were never particularly wealthy, but my parents always did their best to provide for me and my younger sister, Lily, 27F. We were a close-knit family, and while there were some bumps along the way, we always made it through together. I moved to the city a few years ago for work, and after establishing my career, I bought a small but comfortable apartment. It's not a huge place, but it's mine, and I'm proud of it. About 6 months ago, my parents announced that they were planning to sell their house and downsize to something smaller. I was taken aback at first, but I didn't think too much of it. They were getting older, and it made sense for them to move to a smaller space. However, things took a strange turn when I found out that they had sold their house without consulting me at all. I had no idea they were even seriously considering this move until they told me it was already done. At first, I was confused and a little hurt. I had always assumed that if they were going to make such a big life change, they would at least talk to me about it first. I mean, I was their son, and it seemed like something I should have been included in. But when I asked them about it, they just brushed it off, saying they didn't want to worry me and that it was their decision to make. I tried to understand where they were coming from, but it still didn't sit right with me. What really threw me off, though, was when they mentioned their plans to move into my apartment, at least temporarily, while they figured out their next steps. They said they had no place to go and didn't want to rent because it would be too expensive. My immediate reaction was shock. I live in a one-bedroom apartment, and while it's cozy, it's definitely not big enough for two adults, especially my parents. The thought of having them move in with me, even temporarily, felt overwhelming. I tried to explain to them that it wasn't practical for them to move in with me. I told them that my apartment was small, and it wasn't feasible for me to have them living here, especially considering I work from home most of the time. I thought they'd understand, but instead, they became really defensive. They accused me of not caring about them, saying I should be willing to help them in their time of need, and that I was being selfish for not offering them a place to stay. My dad even said, "We raised you for 18 years. The least you can do is return the favor when we need help." I was taken aback by the guilt trip, but I still stood my ground. I explained that while I loved them and wanted to help, there was no way I could fit them in my apartment. I also mentioned that I had no idea how long their stay would be, and that I wasn't comfortable with the idea of them living with me indefinitely. I suggested that they look into renting a small place, or maybe even staying with one of their friends for a while until they figured things out. This did not go over well. My parents were furious, and they accused me of being ungrateful and disrespectful. My mom said that I was acting like I didn't owe them anything, and my dad started bringing up how much they'd sacrificed for me growing up. I tried to stay calm, but it felt like they were twisting my words and making me out to be a terrible son for not immediately agreeing to let them move in. As if things couldn't get worse, my sister, Lily, called me later that evening. She had heard about the argument and sided with our parents, telling me that I was being harsh and that I should be there for them in their time of need. She reminded me that they had always supported me and that I was being selfish for not opening my home to them. I was so frustrated at this point. Lily has never had to deal with the same financial pressures I have, and she has always been more than willing to help my parents with whatever they need. But she's also still living in a small town where we grew up and doesn't have the same responsibilities as I do. I understand that my parents are getting older, and I don't want to see them struggle, but I also don't think I should have to sacrifice my own comfort and privacy to make them feel better. I've worked hard to build my life, and I don't think it's unreasonable to want to maintain my space. I try to be understanding, but I just couldn't bring myself to say yes to them moving in. Since then, things have been tense between us. My parents are still upset, and Lily keeps sending me messages saying I need to step up and be there for our family. I feel like I'm being forced into a corner, and no matter what I do, I'm the one being blamed. I tried to explain to my parents that I'd be more than happy to help them find a solution, but I just can't let them live with me. I even suggested that they consider moving to a retirement community or finding a place nearby, but they didn't seem interested in those options. Now, my family is divided. I feel terrible, but I also feel like I'm being asked to give up my own well-being for the sake of others. I've been struggling with guilt ever since, wondering if I made the right decision. Should I just open my door to them? Or am I justified in wanting to keep my boundaries intact? So, AITA for refusing to let my parents live with me after they sold their house without consulting me first? Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what could be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. AITA for refusing to babysit my niece after my sister-in-law tried to pressure me into it. Okay, so I, 30F, need to know if I'm in the wrong here because I'm getting a lot of mixed reactions from my family, and I just don't know anymore. I'm pretty close with my brother, Mike, 32M, and his wife, Sarah, 30F. We've always been a tight-knit family, and I've been more like a third parent to my niece, Ella, 5F, than just an aunt. I absolutely adore Ella. She's sweet, funny, and honestly, I enjoy spending time with her. But lately, my relationship with Sarah has been strained, and things have taken a weird turn that has left me feeling uncomfortable. A bit of background: I don't have kids of my own. I've always enjoyed the flexibility of being child-free, and while I love my niece, I also value my personal time. I have a full-time job that I take very seriously, and I also enjoy my free time for hobbies, socializing, and just having time to myself. I've babysat Ella on several occasions, sometimes for a few hours, sometimes for a full day, and I've always been happy to help out. But I've started to notice that Sarah, in particular, has been expecting a lot more from me lately. A few weeks ago, Sarah asked me if I could watch Ella for the entire weekend because she and Mike were planning a trip to a nearby city for a much-needed getaway. At first, I didn't think much of it and agreed, thinking it would just be for one night. But then Sarah started talking about it like it was a done deal. She didn't give me much of an option and even started making plans for Ella, as though it was settled. I told Sarah that I needed to check my schedule first, as I had a couple of things planned for that weekend, but she brushed it off and said, "Oh, I'm sure you'll make it work." When I told Sarah I had plans that weekend, she was quiet for a second before saying, "I really need this, and Ella loves spending time with you. It's just for a weekend, and Mike and I really need to recharge. Can you do this for me? We'll be so grateful." I felt guilty, but I didn't want to go back on my word, so I told her I would try to make it work. As the weekend approached, things started to feel a bit off. Sarah kept pushing for more details, asking me what time I'd be picking Ella up and when I'd be dropping her off, as if it were a given that I was taking full responsibility for her. I also found out that Sarah was planning to go out with friends the night before their trip, and she wanted me to pick Ella up from their house before she even left. That would mean I'd be taking care of Ella for a full 48 hours, way more than I had originally agreed to. I wasn't okay with that, and it started to feel like I was being used. I texted Mike to ask if I could talk to him privately, and when we spoke, I told him I was feeling overwhelmed. I explained that I hadn't realized it would be such a long commitment, and I really needed to clarify the situation. Mike told me not to worry about it, that they would be gone for just a couple of days, and it would be fine. He said that Sarah was just really stressed and that he was hoping I could step up and help out because he knew how much Ella liked me. I tried to explain that while I love Ella, I wasn't prepared to take on a whole weekend of babysitting. I reminded Mike that I had other commitments and that I also needed my own space. I told him that I could still babysit Ella for a few hours, but a full weekend just wasn't something I could do. Mike didn't take it well. He told me that I was being selfish and that it wasn't like I was being asked to do something difficult just to watch his daughter for a couple of days. He even went so far as to say, "You're always so busy with your own life, but we really need your help. Why is it so hard to do something for family?" I felt upset by his response, and I told him that it wasn't about being too busy to help, it was about respecting my boundaries. I reminded him that I had agreed to help out before, but that I wasn't comfortable with the sudden expectation of a full weekend of childcare. He was silent for a while before finally saying, "Okay, fine. I'll talk to Sarah." The next day, I received a text from Sarah, and it wasn't just a simple follow-up. She was clearly upset. She said that I was being unreasonable and selfish, that family helps each other out, and that I was letting them down. She also accused me of never being there for them when they needed help. The tone of her message really caught me off guard, especially since I had always been there for them in the past. I tried to respond in a calm and reasonable manner, but Sarah wasn't having it. She said that I was making everything about me, and that Ella was going to be disappointed if I didn't come through. I told her again that I was happy to help in smaller increments, but that a weekend away wasn't something I could commit to. The situation got even more awkward when Mike and Sarah decided to go ahead with their plans and left for the weekend, assuming I'd be there with Ella. I didn't feel comfortable just going along with it, so I texted Mike and told him I couldn't babysit. I also let Sarah know, in no uncertain terms, that I would not be watching Ella, and that they needed to make other arrangements. I felt terrible doing that, but it seemed like my boundaries weren't being respected. When they came back from their trip, they were both upset with me. Sarah didn't speak to me for days, and Mike kept saying how disappointed he was. He He said that I should have just stepped up and helped them out, and that I was making a big deal over nothing. I've heard from other family members that they've both been talking behind my back, calling me selfish and saying that I owe them because they've helped me out in the past. Now, I'm left feeling conflicted. I don't want to cause drama, but I also don't think it's right to pressure me into taking on more than I'm comfortable with, especially when they didn't respect my initial boundaries. AITA for refusing to babysit my niece after my sister-in-law tried to pressure me into it. AITA for refusing to let my cousin live with me after her eviction, even though my family says I'm being heartless. I, 29M, have always had a pretty good relationship with my extended family, but there's one person who's constantly causing drama. My cousin, Jenna, 27F. We grew up in the same town, but we never really had a super close bond. Jenna has always been the type to push the limits, make poor decisions, and expect others to bail her out when things go wrong. For years, I've watched her make one bad choice after another, and while I've helped her out before, I've started to feel like I'm enabling her behavior. A few months ago, Jenna called me out of the blue. She told me that she had just been evicted from her apartment and had nowhere to go. She said she had lost her job a few months prior and had been barely scraping by, living off savings and credit cards. Now, the money had run out, and the landlord had finally kicked her out because she hadn't paid rent in 2 months. She didn't even have enough money to rent a new place, and she was asking if she could crash at my place for a few weeks while she got things figured out. I've been living in a 2-bedroom apartment by myself for the past year. It's a decent place, but it's not huge, and I don't have a spare room dedicated to guests. My first instinct was to say no. Jenna has a history of overstaying her welcome and leaving things a mess when she stays at anyone's house. Plus, I was a little frustrated because this wasn't the first time she had gotten herself into a situation like this. I've seen her go through multiple jobs and apartments in the past few years, and she always expects someone to come to her rescue when things fall apart. However, my mom, 56F, called me right after I got off the phone with Jenna. She told me I was being selfish and that family is supposed to help each other out in tough times. She said Jenna needed a safe place to stay, and it was my duty to support her. I tried explaining that I couldn't have her living with me indefinitely, especially given her track record of not following through with her responsibilities. But my mom insisted, saying I'd be heartless if I turned my back on her, and that I was the only one who could help. I felt guilty. I know that my mom and my aunt, Jenna's mom, have always tried to help Jenna, but their efforts have never worked. They give her advice, financial help, and even let her live with them for short periods, but Jenna always ends up back in the same situation. I've also seen how toxic her behavior can be when she doesn't have a plan. She'll stay in someone's house for weeks, take advantage of their hospitality, and then leave without any gratitude when it's time for her to go. I didn't want to be her next pit stop. After talking it over with a few close friends, I decided to tell Jenna that I couldn't let her stay with me. I explained that I wasn't comfortable with the idea of having her in my space for an extended period, especially since she hadn't shown any signs of changing her behavior in the past. I told her that I hoped she could figure something out on her own, but that I wasn't in a position to help her this time. Jenna didn't take it well. She was upset and angry, accusing me of being unsympathetic and telling me I was abandoning her when she needed me most. She said I was the only family member who could have helped her, and by turning her away, I was just confirming what she had always feared. No one in the family actually cared about her. She said that I was being selfish and didn't understand how hard things were for her. I tried to remain calm and explained that I wasn't trying to be heartless. I told her that I had my own responsibilities, and letting her move in with me would only put additional stress on my life. But the more I tried to explain, the more upset she became. She accused me of judging her for her mistakes, and that's when she started making things personal. She said that I wasn't even close with her and that I had never been there for her when she really needed it. I told her that I had helped her in the past, but it never seemed to make a difference, and she always ended up in the same situation. After that, the tension between us was palpable. She ended up calling my mom, who immediately called me, demanding that I let Jenna stay with me. My mom said I was being unreasonable and that I shouldn't turn my back on family. She told me that I should let Jenna stay for a little while and that I'd feel better about it once she had a job and a plan. I told my mom that I just didn't think it was a good idea and I couldn't afford to let her stay with me in the way she was expecting. My mom got upset and said she was disappointed in me for not helping out when it was a simple thing to do. To make matters worse, my aunt, who is Jenna's mom, got involved and started calling me too. She told me I was being cruel and that I should be ashamed of myself. She said I had plenty of space and could easily share it with my cousin. She also said that Jenna was struggling, and I was just being stubborn about the whole situation. My aunt even brought up that I used to stay with her and my uncle when I was in a tough spot, so I owed Jenna the same kind of support. Now, my phone is blowing up with calls and texts from various family members, all telling me that I need to do the right thing and let Jenna stay with me. They keep reminding me that family helps family, and I'm starting to feel like the black sheep of the family because I won't just give in. I've heard everything from, "You're the only one who can help," to "She's family, and you should support her no matter what." I feel like I'm being backed into a corner. I don't want to be the bad guy, but I also don't want to enable Jenna's behavior anymore. She's been given multiple chances to turn things around, and I don't think letting her stay with me would actually help her in the long run. I'm not sure if I'm being too harsh or if I'm just protecting my own well-being. So, AITA for refusing to let my cousin live with me after her eviction, even though my family says I'm being heartless. AITA for refusing to help my brother financially after he gambled away all his savings. I, 30M, have an older brother, David, 33M, who has always been a bit of a wild card. Growing up, he was the cool, older brother, the one who always had a rebellious streak and got into trouble. He was popular, charismatic, and a bit of a risk-taker, while I was more of the cautious, responsible type. Despite our differences, we've always had a good relationship, or at least that's what I thought until recently. David has been struggling financially for the last couple of years. He had a decent job in the tech industry, but he lost it due to budget cuts at his company. He's been bouncing around with odd jobs since then, but nothing has stuck, and I know he's been really stressed about money. He's always had a bit of a gambling problem, but I never thought it was that bad until a few months ago when he confessed to me that he had been using his savings to gamble. He said he was trying to get ahead and believed he could turn his luck around, but I didn't take him seriously at first. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago. I received a frantic call from David, and he sounded desperate. He told me that he had gambled away all of his savings, around $10,000, and he was in serious trouble. He didn't have enough money to pay rent, let alone buy groceries or cover other living expenses. He asked me for a loan to help him get back on his feet. At first, I was in complete shock. I've always helped him out in the past when he needed it, but this felt different. The fact that he had used his savings to gamble away in a matter of months really set me off. I tried to keep my cool and asked him why he didn't come to me sooner. He admitted that he was ashamed and didn't want to face the reality of what he had done. He also told me that he had tried to stop gambling but couldn't, and he felt trapped in a cycle. I asked if he had considered going to therapy or seeking help for his gambling addiction, but he brushed it off, saying he didn't need it. He just needed a little boost to get back on track. I told him I couldn't give him any money. I told him that I was sorry he was in this situation, but that I couldn't keep enabling his behavior. I explained that I couldn't just give him money every time he got into trouble, especially if he wasn't making any effort to fix the root cause of his problem. I told him that it wasn't healthy for either of us, and I was worried that giving him money would only enable his addiction to continue. David was furious. He started accusing me of being heartless and unsupportive. He said that I didn't understand what he was going through, that he was just trying to survive, and that I was abandoning him when he needed me the most. He told me that if I truly cared about him, I'd help him out without questioning his choices. He also mentioned that I was lucky to have a stable job and savings, and that it wasn't fair that I wasn't willing to share some of it with him. I tried to explain that I wasn't being unfair. I was just setting boundaries. I told him that I cared about him deeply, but I couldn't continue to bail him out every time he made a poor financial decision. I reminded him that I had helped him in the past, but this time felt different. His behavior had been reckless, and I didn't want to enable it further. I also mentioned that if he was truly serious about getting out of this cycle, he needed to make some real changes, like seeking professional help for his gambling addiction. David didn't take it well. He called me selfish and said I was the one with the problem. He accused me of thinking I was better than him and claimed I was just too scared to help him because I didn't want to lose my perfect life. He told me that I was just like everyone else who had given up on him, and that he didn't need family who didn't have his back. I was shocked by how angry and hurtful his words were, but I stood my ground. A few days later, I received a message from our parents. They had heard about the conversation and were upset with me for not helping David. They said that family is supposed to stick together no matter what, and that I should be there for him in his time of need. They told me I was being too harsh and that I needed to stop judging him for his mistakes. My mom even suggested that I could give him a smaller amount to get him started and that I could consider it a loan with the understanding that he would pay me back. I was taken aback by their reaction. My parents have always been supportive of David, but I never expected them to side with him so quickly, especially when they knew about his gambling problem. I told them that I wasn't going to be guilted into giving him money, and I wasn't going to give him anything without him addressing the root of the problem first. I told them that if they wanted to help him, they were welcome to, but I wouldn't be doing it. The situation has caused a rift in our family. David is still not speaking to me, and he's made it clear that he's disappointed in me. Our parents have been calling me every couple of days to tell me that I need to make amends with him, but I still feel strongly that I did the right thing. I don't think it's fair for me to continue enabling his addiction by giving him money, especially when he hasn't shown any effort to get better. Now, I'm wondering if I was too harsh. I feel like I've set a reasonable boundary, but I'm second-guessing myself because of how upset everyone is, especially David. I know he's going through a tough time, but I also know that if I keep bailing him out, I'm just enabling his bad behavior. So, AITA for refusing to help my brother financially after he gambled away all his savings? AITA for refusing to allow my brother to move in with me after he lost his job and his apartment? I, 32M, have an older brother, Ryan, 35M, who's always been kind of the wild card in our family. Growing up, he was always the more rebellious one, while I was the responsible, rule-abiding sibling. Our parents never really seemed to discipline him the way they did me, and as a result, he's had a series of bad decisions that have left him in difficult situations over the years. Despite that, I've always tried to support him when I could, though I've had to set boundaries as well. To give some context, Ryan has bounced around from job to job for the last decade. He's never really stuck with anything long-term, and it's always been a pattern with him. Start a job, get bored, quit, and then start over somewhere else. He has a pretty strong entrepreneurial streak and has tried launching a few businesses, but none of them ever seem to take off. He's a smart guy, but he has this tendency to rely on the idea that things will just work out without putting in the sustained effort to make them work. A few months ago, Ryan lost his most recent job. He didn't give me the full details, but from what I gathered, he was fired for underperformance. After that, he also lost his apartment because he couldn't keep up with rent payments. I wasn't surprised by any of this, but I was disappointed. It's not like this hasn't happened before, but I always hoped he would get his act together. I knew he'd be in a tough spot financially, but I also knew he wouldn't be able to rely on our parents for help because they've pretty much stopped supporting him financially after a series of incidents where he took advantage of them. A few weeks ago, Ryan called me out of the blue and asked if he could stay with me for a while. I wasn't thrilled, but I also knew I couldn't just turn him away. He was in a bad spot, and I didn't want to see him homeless. I've always tried to be a good brother, even if it hasn't always been easy, and this seemed like one of those situations where I should step up. He said he would only need a few weeks to get back on his feet, find a job, and figure out his next move. I agreed, with the understanding that it would be a temporary arrangement. When Ryan moved in, I made it clear that he would need to respect my space and my rules. I have a 2-bedroom apartment, and I live alone. I'm pretty neat, and I like my place to be tidy. I told him I wasn't expecting him to pay rent, but I would need him to help out around the apartment, contribute to groceries, and do his part in keeping things clean. He agreed, and I thought that would be the end of it. The first few days were fine. He was quiet, respectful, and seemed genuinely motivated to find a job. But then, after a week, things started to take a turn. I noticed he was staying up late, playing video games, and sleeping in until noon. I would wake up early for work, and he would be lounging around, watching TV, or scrolling through his phone. When I asked him if he had any interviews lined up, he said he was still waiting for the right opportunity. I try to be patient, but I was starting to feel like I was enabling him to just sit around and not make any real effort to change his situation. Then, the real problem started. He began leaving dishes in the sink, not cleaning up after himself, and not contributing to groceries. At first, I would remind him to do his part, but it became clear that he wasn't taking it seriously. I don't mind helping out family, but I also believe in personal responsibility, and it started to feel like I was doing more for him than he was doing for himself. I asked him if he could at least help with some chores and take responsibility for his share, but he would make excuses or just brush it off. Eventually, I had to start cleaning up after him, which I wasn't happy about. Things got even worse when he started bringing his friends over. I'm not opposed to socializing, but I made it clear from the beginning that I wanted to keep my apartment a quiet, peaceful space. I have a full-time job and need to focus, so I don't appreciate loud gatherings or disruptions. However, Ryan started hosting friends at the apartment without asking me first. They would hang out late into the night, drinking and playing loud music. When I asked him to keep it down or to be more respectful of my space, he would get defensive, saying I was being too uptight and that I needed to relax. I felt like he was taking advantage of the fact that I had offered him a place to stay. It got to the point where I was dreading coming home from work. I didn't feel like I had a peaceful, private space anymore. The final straw was when I came home one day to find a complete mess in the living room, with food wrappers and empty beer cans everywhere. Ryan wasn't even home at the time, but I had to clean up after his friends, and it felt like I was doing all the work. I confronted him about it, and he seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset. He apologized, but it wasn't long before the same behavior started happening again. At this point, I was fed up. I sat down with him and told him that I couldn't continue living like this. I told him that he needed to either start respecting my space and helping out more, or he would have to find somewhere else to stay. I explained that I couldn't have him treating my apartment like a frat house, and that he needed to take responsibility for himself and start working towards his goals. He got defensive, saying I was being unreasonable and that I should be more supportive of him while he's going through a tough time. He accused me of not being understanding of his struggles, which only made me more frustrated. After that conversation, Ryan became distant. He stopped talking to me as much and seemed angry. A few days later, he came to me and said he was thinking about moving out, but that he was feeling lost and didn't know what he was going to do next. I told him that I would always support him, but I couldn't keep enabling him to avoid taking responsibility for his life. He ended up leaving and moving in with a friend from out of town. Since then, we haven't talked much, and there's been a lot of tension between us. Now, my parents are upset with me. They say that I should have been more patient with Ryan and that I shouldn't have kicked him out when he was going through a rough patch. My sister, who's married with kids, thinks I should have been more understanding as well, but I feel like I was being pushed to the limit. I'm not responsible for his failures, and I don't think it's fair for me to sacrifice my own well-being just to be there for him. I love my brother, but I'm not his babysitter. So, AITA for refusing to allow my brother to move in with me after he lost his job and apartment, even though he's going through a rough time. AITA for refusing to let my friend live with me after she got into a fight with her boyfriend. Okay, I'm kind of stuck in the middle of a situation, and I'm feeling conflicted. I need advice to figure out if I'm in the wrong or if I'm just being fair. So here's the backstory. I, 28F, have a close friend, Rachel, 27F, who I've known for almost 10 years. We've been through a lot together, and I would consider her one of my best friends. I've always had her back, and she's had mine. We don't see each other as often anymore because we live in different cities, but we still stay in touch and try to meet up a few times a year. Rachel has been in a relationship with her boyfriend, Jake, 29M, for almost 3 years. They've had their ups and downs, but generally, they seem pretty solid. However, lately, there have been some issues. Rachel has been complaining to me for the past few months about how stressed she feels in the relationship. She says that Jake is overly controlling, that he's been pressuring her to give up some of her hobbies and interests, and that he often accuses her of not prioritizing their relationship enough. She's confided in me about how these things have been making her feel suffocated and unhappy. But at the same time, she always says that she loves him and doesn't want to break up. It's been tough for me to watch because I can see how unhappy she is, but I know she's torn between her feelings for him and her desire for more independence. So last week, I got a text from Rachel asking if she could come stay with me for a little while. She said she and Jake had gotten into a huge fight, and she needed to get away from the situation for a while to clear her head. She didn't go into too much detail, but she mentioned that Jake had said some hurtful things during the argument, and she felt like she couldn't be around him right now. I immediately said I would be happy to have her stay with me for a bit, as I know she's going through a tough time, and I've always offered her a place to stay if she ever needed it. But then, as soon as she arrived, things started to feel off. At first, it was fine. We talked about what had happened between her and Jake, and I listened patiently as she vented about how he had been treating her. But as the days went on, I began to feel more and more uncomfortable with the situation. Rachel started to act like she was here for an indefinite amount of time, not just a little while to clear her head. She had no plans to leave, and every time I brought up the idea of her going back to Jake, she would change the subject or say she wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. I didn't want to pressure her, but I started to feel like I was being put in an awkward position where I was supposed to be her temporary escape from reality without any real boundaries being established. It got worse when Rachel started making herself more at home in my place than I had anticipated. She'd leave her stuff all over the apartment, eat all of my snacks, and use my things without asking. I've always been someone who values my personal space and the way I maintain my environment, so having someone essentially take over my apartment was starting to wear on me. It felt like she was treating it like a permanent home rather than just a temporary refuge. I tried to talk to her about it politely, but she brushed it off, saying she was just getting comfortable because she didn't want to feel like a guest in my home. I understood that, but I also felt like there needed to be some consideration for me, especially when I had already agreed to let her stay as a favor, not as a long-term living situation. A few more days went by, and Rachel seemed to be in no rush to figure things out. Every time I suggested that maybe she should go back and talk things through with Jake, she would say she wasn't ready yet, or that she didn't want to deal with the drama. I could tell she was using me as an emotional crutch, and it was starting to feel like I was being expected to take on more responsibility than I was comfortable with. It wasn't just about letting her stay at my place anymore. She was leaning on me for constant emotional support without making any effort to resolve her own issues. I'm happy to be there for my friends, but I felt like I was losing a bit of my own sense of self in the process. My life was starting to revolve around what Rachel was going through, and I was starting to feel burnout. One night, about a week in her stay, I asked Rachel if she had any plans to go back to Jake or figure things out with him. I tried to be gentle and said something like, "I know you're not ready yet, but I feel like it's been a while, and I don't want to be in the middle of this forever." I wasn't trying to be harsh. I just felt like it was time for her to either move forward or move on, but she completely shut down. She got defensive and said that I was being unsupportive and that I didn't understand how hard it was to make a decision about her relationship. I tried to explain that I wasn't unsupportive, but I needed to know when this was going to end because I was feeling uncomfortable with the situation. She got upset, said I didn't get it, and that she needed more time. That night, she slept in the guest room, and I could feel the tension between us. The next day, I decided I needed to have a serious conversation with her. I sat Rachel down and explained that I was more than happy to help her, but I couldn't keep being the place she ran to without any plan or timeline. I told her that while I loved her and wanted to support her, I had my own life to live and I needed my space back. I told her that I couldn't have her staying with me indefinitely, and it was starting to affect my well-being. I asked her to think about what she needed to do next, whether it was going back to Jake or staying somewhere else to get some distance from him. I was firm but gentle, hoping she would understand where I was coming from. Rachel didn't take it well. She said that I was being selfish and that I was acting like I didn't care about her. She accused me of abandoning her when she needed me the most, and she said I should be the one person who was always there for her, no questions asked. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not caring for her. It was about setting healthy boundaries. She didn't seem to understand, and the conversation ended with her storming out of the apartment. Now, things are really awkward between us. Rachel hasn't spoken to me in a few days, and I'm starting to feel like maybe I went too far by setting boundaries. On the one hand, I know I have every right to expect some space and not let her stay indefinitely, but But on the other, I feel guilty for not just letting her lean on me more. It's hard to know if I did the right thing or if I'm just being too harsh. AITA for refusing to let my friend live with me after she got into a fight with her boyfriend. AITA for not letting my best friend move in with me after she lost her job. I, 27F, have been best friends with Jessica, 28F, for almost 10 years. We met in college and have been inseparable ever since. We've always been there for each other, through breakups, career changes, and family problems. Over the years, our friendship has always been strong, but recently, it's been a little strained. Jessica has always been a bit of a free spirit, never really settled in one place for too long, and constantly jumped between jobs. While I've always admired her adventurous spirit, it's led to a lot of instability in her life. She's never been the type to plan ahead or save money, which has caused her financial issues more than once. Whenever she gets into a tight spot, she comes to me for help, and I've always stepped up because she's my best friend. A few months ago, Jessica lost her job at a tech startup. She was working in customer support, and the company laid off a significant portion of their staff due to financial struggles. She was understandably upset, but she seemed optimistic and said she would find something else quickly. However, weeks turned into months, and she wasn't able to secure a new position. She told me that she had a few interviews, but nothing had panned out. She seemed more and more stressed, and I could tell that things were starting to take a toll on her mentally and emotionally. Then, about 3 weeks ago, she called me in tears. She said she had been evicted from her apartment because she hadn't been able to pay rent for 2 months. I wasn't shocked, to be honest. It wasn't the first time she'd gotten behind on payments, but this time was different. She told me that she had nowhere else to go and was asking if she could stay with me for a while until she figured things out. I've always been someone who values my independence, and I live in a small one-bedroom apartment. There's barely enough space for myself, and I don't have a guest room or anything. The thought of someone living in my space for an indefinite period of time made me anxious. But Jessica was in a tough spot, and I wanted to help her out. I told her that I would think about it, but I needed to be honest about how I was feeling. I spent the next few days thinking about it and talking it over with my boyfriend, Ethan, 29M. Ethan and I have been together for almost 2 years, and he's a big part of my life now. I knew that having Jessica move in with us would affect our relationship, and I didn't want to make any decisions without considering how it would impact both of us. Ethan has always been supportive of my friendship with Jessica, but he made it clear that he wasn't comfortable with the idea of someone living with us long-term. He said he didn't mind if Jessica stayed for a few days or even a week, but he didn't think it was a good idea for her to stay indefinitely, especially since I had already been helping her out financially in the past. I agreed with Ethan. I didn't want to put our relationship at risk, and I also felt like helping Jessica out in this way would only enable her behavior. She had a pattern of relying on others to get by instead of taking responsibility for her actions. It's not like I didn't care about her. She's my best friend, after all, but I knew that letting her move in would be setting a precedent that wasn't healthy for either of us. So, after a lot of thinking, I called Jessica and told her that I couldn't let her move in with me. I explained that my apartment was too small and that I didn't think it would be fair to either of us. I also told her that I cared about her and wanted to support her, but I couldn't offer her a place to stay indefinitely, especially when she wasn't actively working towards solving her own problems. Jessica didn't take it well. She started crying and said that I was the only one she had left. She said I was abandoning her and that I knew how hard things were for her right now. She accused me of not being a real friend and said that if our roles were reversed, I know she would have let me stay with her without hesitation. I tried to explain that this wasn't about not caring. It was about boundaries and making sure we both had the space to grow. But she kept saying that I was being selfish and that I was letting her down when she needed me most. I hung up the phone feeling awful. I've always tried to be there for her, and now it felt like I was the one being judged for drawing a line. A few days later, I got a message from her saying that she had found a temporary place to stay with another friend, but she was still upset with me. She said she couldn't believe I wouldn't help her out and that our friendship would never be the same after this. Ever since that conversation, things have been tense between us. We still text, but it's not the same. I can tell that she's hurt, and honestly, I feel guilty for not just letting her move in. But at the same time, I can't help but feel like I did the right thing. I don't want to be taken advantage of, and I don't think that letting Jessica stay with me would have solved her problems. It would have just delayed the inevitable, and it would have put unnecessary strain on my relationship with Ethan. Now, I'm left questioning if I made the wrong decision. My family is also divided on the issue. My mom says I should have let Jessica stay with me because family helps family, but my dad and brother think I made the right call. They both said that it's important to help, but it's also important to set boundaries and not enable someone's bad habits. So, AITA for not letting my best friend move in with me after she lost her job and was evicted, even though she's upset and says I'm being selfish. AITA for telling my best friend she can't come to my vacation after she made fun of my body. I, 28F, have been best friends with Sarah, 29F, since high school. We've always been pretty close, sharing everything from personal struggles to big life decisions. But recently, I've been feeling like maybe our friendship has changed, and I'm not sure if it's something I can fix or if it's just a natural drift that happens as people grow older. The latest incident has me seriously questioning whether I've been too lenient with her over the years. I've always struggled with my body image, but in the past year, I've been working hard to get in better shape. I've been going to the gym regularly, eating healthier, and doing everything I can to feel more confident. I've lost around 30 pounds, and while I still have a long way to go, I've been feeling better about myself. One thing I've done to celebrate my progress is plan a vacation to the beach with a few close friends, including Sarah. It was meant to be a fun, relaxing trip where we could spend time together, have some fun, and just enjoy the beach. A few weeks ago, I sent out the details of the trip to the group, and we started planning. Sarah was super excited about it. We talked about what swimsuits we'd wear, what activities we'd do on the beach, and all the fun things we get up to. I was looking forward to spending time with her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off when she'd comment on my progress. I could tell she was supportive, but the way she sometimes talked about my body made me uneasy. For example, Sarah would often say things like, "Wow, you look so much thinner now," or "You look so much better than you did last year. You could actually wear a bikini now." At first, I thought she was just trying to be encouraging, but then I realized that her comments were starting to feel more like backhanded compliments. It was as if my worth was tied only to my physical appearance, and I wasn't sure how to address it without causing tension. The last straw came about a week ago. We were out at a bar with a group of friends, and I was feeling pretty good about myself that night. I wore a cute dress, and I was feeling confident, having had a few drinks. At some point in the evening, Sarah brought up the trip again. She was asking what kind of swimsuits I was planning to bring, and I mentioned that I was excited to wear a new bikini I had bought. That's when she said something that completely threw me off. She laughed and said, "Oh, I can't wait to see you in a bikini. You've really worked hard, but I don't know, I'm still imagining you in one of those weird grandma swimsuits. You know, the ones with the skirt and all the coverage." I froze. I didn't laugh. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her. It wasn't the first time she'd made comments like this, but something about the way she said it, with that little smirk on her face, really hurt. I tried to brush it off at first, but I couldn't. I felt embarrassed and self-conscious, and I suddenly started second-guessing everything I had planned for the trip. Sarah was my best friend, and I thought she was supportive of me, but it felt like she was poking fun at my body rather than celebrating how far I had come. I tried to keep the mood light and said, "Well, I'm not planning on wearing one of those, but thanks for the encouragement, I guess." I laughed it off, but inside I was seething. Later that night, I texted Sarah privately. I told her that what she said about my body really hurt me and that I didn't appreciate her making fun of me, especially when I had been so open about my body struggles. I told her that I felt like she wasn't respecting the progress I had made, and it made me feel like she was more focused on my appearance than my hard work. I told her I didn't want to carry that energy with me into our vacation, and if she was going to continue making comments like that, I didn't think I'd be able to have her there. Sarah replied almost immediately, but her response was not at all what I expected. She said she was just joking and didn't think it would hurt me. She said that I was being too sensitive and that I should lighten up. She also said that I was too obsessed with my body and that I needed to stop taking everything so personally. In her response, she made it clear that she didn't think she had done anything wrong. I was hurt, but I didn't want to escalate things further. So I told her that I needed some space to process everything and that I wasn't sure if I'd be comfortable having her come on the trip anymore. I explained that the comments, even if they were meant as jokes, were damaging to me, and I didn't think I could just let it go. She didn't respond to that text, but the next day she reached out again, saying I was overreacting and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. I've been wrestling with what to do ever since. I don't want to lose my best friend, but I also don't want to ignore how her words made me feel. I feel like I've been supportive of her through so much over the years, and this is the first time I've felt like she's really let me down. I don't want to go on a vacation where I feel self-conscious or uncomfortable, especially when I've been so excited about the progress I've made in improving my body image. I decided to tell her that I didn't think it would be a good idea for her to come on the trip if she wasn't going to be respectful of my feelings. I told her that I still loved her as a friend, but I couldn't ignore the way she made me feel. She responded by saying that I was being petty and that she didn't want to go on the trip with me if I was going to hold a grudge over something so small. She said she'd rather not go at all than be around someone who couldn't take a joke. Now, I feel like I've ruined our friendship. I've been going back and forth about whether I made the right decision. Part of me thinks I should have let it go and just gone on the trip with her, but another part of me feels like this is bigger than just a joke. I've never asked Sarah to change who she is, but this feels like a fundamental lack of respect for my boundaries and my feelings. So, AITA for telling my best friend she can't come to my vacation after she made fun of my body. AITA for refusing to give my parents money to help with their house repairs, even though they've always helped me financially. I, 29M, have always had a somewhat complicated relationship with my parents. They've been supportive of me throughout my life, but it's often felt like there's a bit of an unspoken expectation that I would always be there for them when they needed something. This was fine for a long time, but recently, I've started to feel like I'm being taken advantage of. To give some context, my parents aren't struggling financially in the way some might assume. They've always lived comfortably, and I grew up in a relatively middle-class household. They both have steady jobs, and their living situation isn't precarious. However, there's a pattern with them when it comes to managing money. Often, they live beyond their means, which results in them running into financial trouble every few years. They are also pretty bad at saving, despite their income, and they tend to spend impulsively on things like home renovations, trips, or gadgets they don't really need. This brings me to the current situation. A few months ago, my parents called me and told me that they needed help with repairs on their house. Their roof had started leaking, and there were some other issues in the house that they claimed were urgent. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I asked how much it would cost to fix, they told me it would be around $15,000. Now, that's a huge amount of money, but I know that these kinds of repairs can be expensive. Still, I was surprised that they didn't have the money set aside for something like this. When I asked them why they couldn't pay for the repairs themselves, my mom told me that they'd been struggling financially. She explained that they had dipped into their savings over the past year to help pay for a few big purchases, namely, a brand new car for my dad, which cost a pretty penny. They had also paid for a vacation to Europe last year, which they had mentioned several times, but I didn't think too much about at the time. The car and the vacation weren't really necessary, and I couldn't help but feel a little irritated hearing about these expenditures now that they were asking me for money. I've been saving for my own future, my own house, a solid emergency fund, and other long-term goals. I'm not wealthy by any means, but I live within my means and have managed to avoid getting into debt. The last thing I wanted to do was take a chunk of my savings to bail out my parents, especially when I felt that they had made some questionable financial choices. But like I said, they've helped me in the past. They paid for part of my college tuition when I couldn't afford it, and they've lent me money in the past when I was between jobs. So, out of a sense of obligation and gratitude, I agreed to loan them $5,000, with the understanding that they would pay me back in installments over the next year. I thought that was a fair compromise. I didn't have the full $15,000 lying around, but I was able to help in a way that wouldn't completely drain my savings. They seemed grateful at the time, and I assumed that was the end of it. A few weeks later, my mom called me again. This time, she said that the initial repairs to the roof had uncovered even more problems than they had expected. It turned out the house needed some major structural repairs, which would cost another $20,000. Now, at this point, I was getting frustrated. I'd already given them $5,000, and it was clear they hadn't fully assessed the situation before asking for money. My mom claimed that they had no choice but to move forward with these repairs because the house would fall apart if they didn't. But I was starting to feel like they were asking for money without fully considering their own financial habits. When I asked her how they planned to pay for the additional repairs, she told me that they were thinking about taking out a loan, but it would take time to get approved. She then asked if I could lend them another $10,000 to help cover the costs. I was taken aback. I had already given them a substantial amount, and now they were asking for more. I told my mom that I wasn't in a position to give them that much money, and I honestly didn't feel comfortable with the idea of just handing over that amount, especially since I didn't think they had learned from their financial mistakes. I offered to help in other ways, maybe helping them find a loan with better terms or giving them advice on budgeting, but she was very dismissive of that. She said that they didn't want to go into debt if they didn't have to, and that family helps family. She pointed out how they had always been there for me, and now it was my turn to step up. She even made me feel guilty for not helping more, saying things like, "If you care about us, you'll help us when we're in need." That guilt trip really hit me hard, and I started questioning whether I was being unreasonable. I felt bad because I do love my parents and I know they've helped me in the past, but I also knew that I had to draw a line. I can't keep bailing them out when they're making choices that are putting them in this position in the first place. I told them that I wouldn't be able to lend them another large sum of money and that they should consider other options, like cutting back on unnecessary spending or finding a way to make more income. My parents were incredibly upset with me. My dad called me the next day and said that I was being selfish and that I clearly didn't care about their well-being. He reminded me of how they helped me out when I was younger and how they supported me when I didn't have much money. I tried to explain my reasoning, but it felt like they weren't listening. It's like they expected me to just give them whatever they needed without considering how much it would affect my own future. They've always seemed to think that I owe them for everything they've done for me. And while I'm grateful, I don't think that means I should have to sacrifice my own financial security. Since then, the tension between us has only gotten worse. I've been feeling a lot of guilt, but I also don't think I'm in the wrong. I've done what I can to help, but I can't keep throwing money at their problems, especially when I don't think they're being responsible about their finances. Now, I'm really torn. My parents have basically stopped talking to me, and my relationship with them feels strained. My sister, 34F, thinks I'm in the right, but she also says that I should try to repair things with them eventually. My friends are divided too. Some think I should have done more, but others agree with me that I'm not obligated to keep enabling their bad financial decisions. So, AITA for refusing to give my parents money to help with their house repairs, even though they've always helped me financially. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.